Part 1.
I never thought I'd feel this kind of ache again. Not at my age. The kind that curls itself around your ribs, tightens when you breathe, and leaves a silence in the room even when people are talking. It started with a smile. Innocent enough. The kind you give a child when you're proud, or maybe when you're just grateful they remembered your name. But it wasn't my name he remembered. My grandson, Elijah, had just turned 15. He'd invited his friend over for the weekend. Quiet boy. Polite. Jacob. Always said thank you. Always cleared his plate. The kind of boy mothers hoped their sons would be. He had this calmness to him. Observant. Too observant. The first time I caught it was at dinner. My husband had passed away 2 years prior. The chair across from me still sat untouched. Elijah filled the space with jokes and mindless chatter. Jacob, though, he watched. Not the kind of watching that feels invasive. The kind that sees. I knew that kind. I used to have that. Later that evening, I caught him staring at the photo of my wedding day. His eyes didn't move to the man beside me. They held mine. Frozen in glass and time.
I wondered what he saw.
I should have looked away sooner. Elijah didn't notice much. Teenagers never do. But Jacob, he paid attention. He noticed the book I left open on the porch swing. He picked up the mug I forgot near the rose bush. He knew I drank peppermint tea in the evening and didn't like sugar. He asked questions, little ones. About my garden, about the music I played softly in the afternoons. But it wasn't about plants or violins. It was about me.
Someone was asking about me.
And I told myself it was harmless. Then the moment came. Soft, quiet, forgettable to anyone else. Elijah had gone to sleep early. Jacob lingered in the kitchen. The kettle whistled, and I moved to pour it. Our hands brushed. It wasn't an accident. I felt it in the way neither of us pulled away. His fingers were warm, steady. I didn't speak. He didn't either. But the silence grew heavier. Not the awkward kind. The kind that hums beneath your skin and reminds you you're still alive. When I handed him his tea, he didn't say thank you. He looked at me with something that didn't belong in this house. Something I'd buried long ago. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought of my husband. Of our first years. The years before the disappointment settled in. Before silence became the loudest thing between us. I remembered how it felt to be looked at like I was still someone worth wanting. Worth wondering about. I told myself it would pass. That I was lonely. That grief makes fools of all of us. But Jacob wasn't the fool. And I wasn't just grieving. Not anymore. Part 2. Elijah never sensed the change. He still bounded into rooms, still tossed his shoes by the door, still trusted that the world moved in straight lines. Jacob, on the other hand, moved like he knew better. As if he'd already seen what happened when people strayed from their paths. He moved like someone who understood consequence, but touched it anyway. He stayed the whole weekend. On Sunday morning, I found him outside, standing at the edge of the garden. The air was thick with that early spring chill that clings to your sleeves. I watched him from the kitchen window. He had one of my roses in his hand, half-bloomed, fragile. He didn't pick it, just touched it with the back of his fingers like it might disappear. I stepped outside, barefoot, tea in hand. He turned slightly, but didn't speak. You like the garden? I asked, voice soft, like I was afraid the morning might shatter if I spoke too loud. He nodded. It's peaceful. You don't get much peace at home? I already knew the answer. He shrugged. Enough to know what it's not. That's settled between us. I didn't ask more. Some stories shouldn't be pulled. They unravel on their own, eventually. Elijah came out minutes later, breaking the moment with a grin and a football in hand. Jacob slipped back into his role easily. Best friend, polite guest, careful boy. But something lingered in the way he glanced at me when Elijah wasn't looking. Not desire, not yet. But something that rhymed with it. He left that afternoon, and I told myself to let it be. But I kept finding the moments again. In my head. The way he watched my hands when I stirred tea. The way he lingered a second longer than necessary when we passed in the hallway. I told myself it was curiosity. Youth. Projection. I lied. A few days later, he texted Elijah. I heard the ding from across the room. Elijah laughed, held up his phone, said Jacob wanted to come by again. Says he forgot his jacket. He hadn't worn one. That evening, I was alone when he arrived. Elijah had gone to the store with a neighbor. I told Jacob he could wait inside. He didn't sit. Just stood there, right in the entryway, eyes flicking around like he wasn't sure if he was welcome or already in too deep. You didn't forget anything, I said. I should have kept quiet. He nodded once slow.
No.
I don't know what I expected then. Regret, maybe. An apology. But not what he said next. You looked sad. That night. I didn't like it. That shouldn't have been enough to crack something in me. But it did. Because it wasn't the words, it was the fact that someone noticed. That someone cared. He wasn't trying to take anything. He wasn't even asking for something.
He just saw me.
All the things I'd been hiding under. I'm fine and half smiles. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him he was a boy and I was broken, and the world would eat both of us alive for even thinking this was anything but wrong. But I didn't. I just turned and walked into the kitchen. And he followed.
Part 3.
We didn't touch. Not that night. Not physically, at least. But something passed between us in the stillness of the kitchen. The kind of thing that lives in glances, in half-swallowed breaths, in the hush that follows a truth too heavy to name. I poured a glass of water, with trembling hands. He sat at the table without being asked. There was no performance to it, just an unspoken knowing that something had shifted, and neither of us had the courage to shift it back. He didn't look at me like a boy with a crush. He looked at me like someone who knew pain. And when pain recognizes itself in another, it doesn't need permission to linger. Elijah came home before anything else could slip. He crashed through the door, laughing about something trivial, holding a bag of chips. Jacob stood immediately, voice light again, stepping into the version of himself that Elijah knew. And I watched him do it, watched him bury everything we hadn't said beneath a joke, a smirk, a safe silence. The days that followed were worse than the moment itself, because now there was a before and an after. I tried to pretend nothing had happened, but my hands betrayed me. I stirred my tea too long. I let dinner burn once. I caught myself standing at the window, hoping for a shadow on the sidewalk.
It wasn't lust.
People always want to call it that, simplify it into something they can scorn. But this was different. It was something deeper. Something wrong, yes, but not shallow. It wasn't about Jacob. Not really. It was about being seen, being needed,
Being missed.
My husband hadn't touched me for the last 4 years of his life. He loved me in a quiet, tired kind of way.
But he stopped looking at me.
And after a while, I stopped looking too. You tell yourself it's normal, that it happens, that it doesn't matter. Until someone looks at you like they still see a person, not a role, not a title, not a mother, not a widow. Just a person. Jacob texted me 3 nights later. Not Elijah.
Me.
Just wanted to say I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I didn't mean to make things harder for you. I stared at that message for an hour. Typed responses. Deleted them. Nothing fit. Nothing was true and safe at the same time. Eventually, I wrote, "You didn't make anything harder. Life did that on its own." He didn't reply, but he came by again the next weekend. This time, Elijah was busy with a school project, locked away in his room. Jacob asked if he could sit outside for a bit, said the house felt heavy.
I said yes.
Always yes, it seemed. We sat on the porch swing side by side. The sun was setting, everything drenched in gold. For a long time we said nothing. Then he turned to me quiet. "I don't want to mess things up," he whispered. I felt the words before I heard them. Felt them in my throat, in the sharp edge behind my ribs.
You already haven't, I said.
But we both knew that wasn't true.
Part 4.
Jacob didn't come the next weekend. Or the one after. Elijah didn't notice. Said he was busy with exams, that they'd catch up later. I nodded, pretending I hadn't checked my phone more times than I cared to admit, pretending I hadn't written a dozen messages I never sent. The silence from him was heavier than his presence had ever been. It crept into the corners of my days, pressing itself into the empty spaces. I kept looking for him in the garden, in the chair by the window, in the mug I'd set out by habit. Loneliness is cruel. But longing, that's something else. It lingers even when you know better. Especially when you know better. Then, on a Tuesday I can't forget, he came back. No warning. Just the sound of a knock. Slow and deliberate. I opened the door, heart bruising my ribs. He looked different. Tired. Like he hadn't been sleeping. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't answer. Just stepped aside. Elijah wasn't home. A blessing or a curse? I hadn't decided yet. Jacob walked to the same chair in the kitchen, the one he always chose. I stayed standing. "I thought it was better if I stayed away," he said after a while. "It probably was." He nodded, then looked up. "But I haven't stopped thinking about you." The words should have disgusted me. Should have made me feel ashamed. They didn't. They just confirmed what I already knew. That whatever this was, it hadn't been in my head. That I wasn't crazy or cruel. I was just starving. For attention. For gentleness. For the kind of presence that doesn't flinch when you fall apart. "I'm not someone you can love," I said, voice like sandpaper. "I'm not someone you should love." His reply was quiet. "That's not the same thing." We sat in that awful honesty, letting the pain settle between us. I wanted to touch his hand. Just once. Just to see if it still felt like something human. But I didn't. I couldn't. "You're going to forget me," I said, almost like a wish. "You're going to go off and build your life, and this will be something you barely remember. A phase. A strange story." He didn't argue. He just looked down at his hands. "I don't want you to be a story," he said. "I want you to be okay." That nearly broke me. Because no one had said that in a long time. Not with that much weight. Not with that much heart. "I will be." I lied. He stood to leave. Didn't ask for anything.
Didn't try to stay.
Just met my eyes quietly, like he was saying goodbye to something bigger than a moment. As the door closed behind him, I felt something tear and settle all at once. I walked into the garden and sat by the half-bloomed rose. The one he never picked. Maybe some things aren't meant to grow. Maybe some are only meant to be seen, gently once. And maybe sometimes that's enough.